Hey there, and welcome to another Brexit Explained video. In this video we're going to talk about a big vote that happened on Tuesday, a day full of big votes in Parliament. As well as this Brexit related vote, MPs also voted to legalise marriage equality and abortion in Northern Ireland. We made a whole video going into the process, and explaining why Northern Ireland is behind the rest of the UK on issues like this. If you're interested in checking out the whole video, there's a link to that in the description. Anyway, you clicked on a Brexit Explained video. So what's the Brexit-related amendment which also passed on Tuesday? The amendments we're going to discuss were proposed by Conservative MP Dominic Grieve. And essentially, they were attempts to make proroguing Parliament harder. If you're not familiar with prorogation, here's a quick overview. Prorogation is basically the ending of the parliamentary session, and refers to the time between the end of one parliamentary session and the beginning of the next one. Essentially the plan here is that if the current Parliament doesn't approve a no deal, the Prime Minister will just suspend Parliament, leave it in this prorogued state until the October 31st deadline passes. Then they can bring back Parliament when it's too late for them to stop no deal. Prorogation is technically a royal prerogative, which means that it's formally the right of the monarch. In reality, the royal prerogative is usually exercised by the Prime Minister, although it does depend on the precedent. We made a whole video about the process of prorogation, so if you're interested, there's a link to it down below. The amendment we're discussing today is actually one of 4 amendments, originally proposed by Grieve. These amendments are known as Amendments 14, 15, 16 and 17. Just for context, these amendments apply to a bill about the Northern Irish government. However, Grieve has specifically designed the amendments so that they also apply to Brexit more generally.
And I call Dominic Grieve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, it's been raised with me, and I entirely accept that the issue of Brexit also features in this matter, and so it should. Brexit threatens Northern Ireland more than almost any other part of the United Kingdom. And in particular, I can't escape the fact that I have listened with astonishment to a number of references from people who may be holding a high office in the near future, one of whom appears to think that proroguing Parliament to achieve Brexit is an acceptable form of activity for the leader of the executive, when in fact it is a constitutional enormity and a gross undermining of democracy. And so I freely admit that one of the purposes behind these amendments is to try to ensure that this extraordinary threat made against this House can be banged on the head.
Do these amendments, if moved, if passed, prevent the House being prorogued?
If all the amendment, including new clause 14, were to be passed, yes, it would prevent this House being prorogued, which is why I put them together as a package.
Amendment 14 requires Parliament to be reconvened to debate the Northern Ireland Assembly, even if Parliament wasn't in session. This would basically have made prorogation impossible, as Parliament would be required to be brought back into session. This amendment wasn't actually selected by the Speaker, and so it wasn't actually voted on. But this might not be the end of the amendment just yet. After the voting finished, Dominic Grieve implied that the House of Lords could reintroduce the amendment and then send it back to the Commons to be voted on for a second time. Amendment 15 required that the government produce a report every fortnight to update Parliament about how the Northern Ireland Assembly talks are going. While these reports don't seem obviously connected to Brexit, it makes prorogation marginally more difficult, because it means that the government would have to prorogue and then reconvene Parliament within the space of 2 weeks, in order to meet the time frame for delivering these reports. Usually this would be easy, most prorogations only last a few days. However, a constitutionally controversial prorogation might take more time to sort out, especially if there's some ambiguity about what the Queen would do if a prorogation was requested. That's because if the Prime Minister did go to the Queen and ask her to prorogue Parliament until after October 31st, the Prime Minister would effectively be putting the Queen in the middle of a constitutional crisis. She'd have to choose between Parliament, which didn't want a no deal, and the Prime Minister, who does. This is, let's be completely honest, absolutely insane. In the 21st century, UK politics has been pushed so far that we're resorting back to some good old-fashioned monarchism. You don't have to be pro or anti-no deal to agree that when the political fate of the country rests on the Queen's discretion, something has gone wrong.
And the very act of asking the Crown to prorogue Parliament would involve the constitutional monarch in a profoundly political question. Given the fact that the majority of MPs have expressed opposition to the prospect of the UK leaving without a deal, the prorogation of Parliament in order to get a No Deal Brexit through would be unconstitutional, undemocratic and entirely untenable.
So to recap, the purpose of Amendment 15 is to prevent Parliament from being prorogued for more than 2 weeks. This amendment was selected and ended up being voted on in Parliament.
We now come to Amendment 15 to Clause 3, Mr Dominic Grieve to move formally. The question is that Amendment 15 be made. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No! Division, clear the lobby. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 294. The noes to the left, 293.
The ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Apparently the vote only passed because a Conservative whip decided to go to the toilet at the wrong time, and so missed the vote. That's how close the margins are when it comes to Brexit these days. A weak bladder could be the difference between Remain and No Deal. Anyway, Amendment 15 has not just made it logistically harder for the Prime Minister to force through a no deal, it's also made it politically more complicated. This is because 7 Conservative MPs voted against the government on this amendment, and 2 more voted for Grieves' other amendments. This demonstrates that there's a fair few Conservatives who are willing to vote against the government to try and stop the government from forcing through no deal. Once again though, this doesn't mean that prorogation is off the table for good. Boris Johnson probably always knew that prorogation would upset some Conservative MPs, and as long as he can get it done within 2 weeks, it's still an option. Amendment 16 was a fairly trivial amendment about the wording of a bill. It was put to a vote and this happened.
Clear the lobby. The ayes to the right, 289. The noes to the left, 292. The noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock.
That means the bill was defeated 292 votes to 189. Amendment 17, by contrast, was a pretty important motion. As well as requiring fortnightly updates on the progress of talks on restoring the Northern Ireland Assembly, Article 17 would also have required the government to schedule time for Parliament to hold an amenable motion, nominally about the report every 2 weeks. Amenable motions are otherwise known as meaningful votes, and basically mean that Parliament could take control of the parliamentary schedule every 2 weeks, and use it to block a no deal, most likely using legislation like the Cooper-Bowles Bill. Essentially, this would mean that the government wouldn't be able to force a no deal through Parliament if Parliament decided that they didn't want it. This motion made it to the vote, and this is what happened.
We now come to Amendment 17 to Clause 3, Dominic Grieve to move formally. The question is that Amendment 17 be made. Division! Clear the lobby. Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 289. The noes to the left, 293.
The noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock.
As they just said, it was defeated 293 votes to 289, which means that prorogation is still on the table, at least legally. Anyway, those are the amendments that were voted on Tuesday night. So while only Article 15 made it through, making it slightly harder for the government to force a no deal through Parliament, there's still time for the Lords to bring Amendment 14 back to the Commons. If that does happen, we will of course be reporting on it, and if you subscribe, you'll be updated when we do. Also, make sure you hit the bell icon so that you get notified every time we release a video. You can also find more content from us across other social networks simply by searching for TLDR News.